welcome everybody to another stream. Hope you're doing, or maybe even good. That would be wonderful. So last time we didn't really have a stream because everything broke. The drivers fell away, so there was no audio, no video, and it was a big mess. And it took me a few hours to get resolved, and as you can see, it still sometimes happens. But for today, because we missed one stream, so the April challenge topic I think we'll cover next stream. But for today, I thought it would be fun to continue with our world building series. So if you are new to this, I will quickly walk you through what we've done so far. So I'm following the template that I've created for world building that kind of goes from big concepts to small concepts. So we start with the planet and how it's situated in the system, then dive a little bit closer into, well, that part is important because it defines the seasons and how the planet life adapts to that. And then we go more into biomes and different type of life ecosystems, which then goes into different sorts of life. So we start with plant life and then go to, didn't go in here, but then we go into animals and then into, let me show this little sketch here. So we go into plants, animals, then sentient species, and then move to different cultures of those sentient species, and finally land on heroes. So we had a few streams. This was like a world overview, like universe overview stream. This was more like a atlas overview, but without really, you know, going too deep into the continent itself. And for today, I thought, what if we take it one step further? Also, this is a sneaky preview, first test print of the cards that we're working. Everything here will change. This was something between testing printer and testing the designs, but this is where all of this will go ultimately. I mean, not the images, but the thoughts behind this world ultimately will end up on these cards. Hopefully. We'll see how they like turn, but that's the idea. So, because we already covered the planet and kind of the overview, this time I have a bit of a plan for this stream. Not very detailed plan, but a plan nonetheless. Also, as usual, if you're new to it, we do a couple of hours of this, sketching something and talking, and then we end on the musical jam, including this device thing. But for now, let me quickly remind you about the world we're working with. So the planet is called Eotara. It's rotating around a very complex system of 6 suns that are divided into pairs and are in their turn rotating around a black hole, and around all of that our planet Eotara rotates. So as you would imagine, the lighting conditions and all these things will be quite intense and unique. We already covered that there are 3 seasons on Eotara: eclipse, where all sun pairs kind of align together, which then goes into scatter, which kind of like is the longest season, where the sun pairs diverge from each other on the sky as far as possible, after which they kind of go back into convergence when they start moving closer together until the eclipse again. That's a year on Eotara. Eclipse is the most intense period, where all the suns kind of show up together on the sky, and that's when the light effects are the strongest. And then scatter, like at the end of scatter, or I guess in the middle of scatter. Well, no, at the end of scatter, before they start converging again. At the end of scatter you would have like the least intense period of life. So those obviously will affect the life, and then the weekdays. But well, the weekdays also, each day has its own sun dominant on the sky. But for today, it's not gonna matter all that much, because I'm just gonna start sketching. In the set 1 of our world story. So, you know, the world of Eotara has hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, and there were things happening, tectonic events and all that stuff. But this is more of a mythology, I guess, than map making. But today I wanted to kind of go a little bit deeper into the actual map making process. For that, we're gonna pick the focal point. Eotara is a globe, or sphere, and for our first set of cards there is a narrative story, let's just say story, that guides the player and the whole narrative, I guess, of this set. And everything happens on the continent that's called Everforest, I guess, or Elicor in a different language on that planet. So this is the continent we're gonna focus on. There are other continents, but for this part of the story, we will consider them maybe terra incognita. Something we don't know yet, or somebody heard something, but we don't have any evidence for those other continents, so we're not gonna. For the continent that we are gonna draw, it helps to figure out kind of how continents form. I think having logic and some sense of realism really helps to make the map feel alive. So, you know, if you have a planet where physics work roughly the same way and you want to keep things explainable, I guess you would say that there is gravity, right? So that we have a core of the planet, we have some stuff around it, and gravity is pulling stuff in. And if Eotara is anywhere similar to Earth, which it is, it would have kind of masses of more solid crust, I guess, that's on the outside of this sphere, and then something more soft closer to the center. And so ultimately it's those things, like we will call them tectonic plates, they're just floating on the bed of kind of soft material around the core, being pulled by the gravity and the rotation of the Earth all the way of the planet. It's not Earth. So what happens when those blobs of mineral collide on the surface? Well, there are a few things that can happen. If you imagine those two things kind of moving towards each other or alongside each other, if we look from above, let's look from above first, we can kind of imagine, I guess, two types of motion and everything in between. So they can move kind of in horizontal direction across each other, and they can move in latitudinal, I guess, direction along each other. And obviously they can go in any directions in between, depending on the mass of that tectonic plate and whatever else is happening with the planet. But with kind of this direction, what is it called? Latitudinal direction? Anyway, I don't know. In this vertical horizontal move, you would mostly get just very like the tectonic plates would kind of rub against each other, right? So they would just produce very kind of unstable areas, I guess, with lots of canyons and things falling through, earthquakes, maybe. Well, all areas like this will have some activity, like volcanoes and geysers or lava fields. earthquakes. But with this movement kind of towards each other, you would have basically either both of those plates going up, you would have both of these plates going down, and then you can have different variations of those plates kind of layering on each other. So what this, I guess, can help us with is figuring out what is gonna be on the continent, because the continent is also not flat, so you would have some formations that are sticking out, some formations that are more deep grooves left over after centuries of tectonic activity. But this can help us decide whether we would have mountains or deep crevasses. So if we have our continent, and we kind of know that we have one big mass here, and then a very narrow path, and then we have kind of bigger, another big shape at the bottom here. So we can imagine a mountain ridge that kind of goes from the west side of the northern continent and then kind of crosses into southern area. This is where our, I guess, tectonic plates would connect. So this is kind of like a divider between the two oceans. Like if you imagine this water here, this tectonic line or whatever would be kind of a mountain ridge between the two. So we can just indicate here that we have mountains. And here in the center, this is kind of would be, I guess, the lowest point in this mountain ridge. And from the story point, we know that there is a big empire of desert merchants that kind of occupies this connecting point between the south and the north parts of the continent. So here, for example, more we know in the middle it's, let's say, desert and kind of the flattest area, I guess, of these two plates. The bottom one, for example, we can make more mountainous. So if we would imagine kind of them plates moving in these directions, then maybe they will squeeze more the edge here, so they will be kind of more diverse mountainous regions on the south of this continent rather than in the northern part. So with mountains, it's rarely that you see just, a plateau and then mountain standing up. I guess that could happen also if you have very solid type of rock or material and a lot of wind out around that, or a glacier that was passing by and scrubbed all the softer materials around, so you would have these really weird shapes of the mountain standing up. But generally, if you think about it kind of being squeezed and cracked from the side, then you would see that it's kind of crumbling. And the further it is from the crack, the more crumbly it gets. Am I just making up geology rules here? Maybe if you do know geology better than me, which is like, do let me know if this makes sense so far. So we can kind of indicate in a few areas maybe how those cracks spread out from the main crack. And those processes, we know that they're very long and they take a long time, so it's not like you would have lava stream bursting up each corner of the mountain range. But this sort of gives us the indication of where we will have kind of higher areas and where we would have lower areas. And because the planet is Tara is also covered with water, you can imagine how the water would kind of occupy as much area as possible, so it would have produced kind of this jagged area where the mountains are the closest to the sea, and then probably kind of soften out where there are less mountains. But here we can see that it's pretty, like the northern western part is pretty much mountains. So we would have kind of jagged line all here, and then it would smoothen out more desert meets sea kind of thing until it starts rising again. Let's take these mountains. We can probably end the content here. Jagged lines with its cliffs. As we established, the kind of lower, the southern part of the continent is a bit more mountainous, and this part is going to be less mountains. And because we have these kind of tall peaks on the south, some of those tall peaks would also kind of stick out from the water, so maybe we would have a bit more islands on this side, and this could be kind of like this archipelagos, you know, where if you imagine mountains sticking out, then water level, these kind of three mountains, they're part of the same ridge. Maybe there is like a small one, but ultimately it's the same mountain. So I guess that would be what we would call archipelago. Also, because there are these kind of tectonic connections here, this is going to be quite an intense area in terms of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. And so I imagine, you know, like this plate is kind of moving this way, and this plate is moving that way, so that kind of, you know, that's a geological term. You know, can they crumble at the bottom more than at the top? So kind of here we would have more mountains rising up, and these guys kind of going down maybe, or also rising up. Whereas, like if you imagine them kind of moving like this, then at the north here they would kind of move away from each other, which will probably also cause unstable areas and hot springs, geyser fields, and all these things. So following the same idea, maybe some of these mountains just stick out as islands on that side. Maybe we can have islands here as well. There you go. So this is what we have with 4 mountains, and everywhere kind of where the mountains roll off, depending on the minerals around and all that stuff, you would have either hills or maybe they're hard cliffs going into the ocean. One of those. What else are we missing here? Well, we still haven't covered much of the rivers and all that stuff. So if we imagine that some of these mountains, kind of the top areas, I guess here the south and kind of along this area on the north, would have snow and glaciers on them, it's kind of safe to assume that some of that stuff is gonna melt and float down, and that is gonna create different rivers and kind of water features. So for that, let's maybe pick a different pencil color. I got some extra pencil colors just in case. But for rivers, let's use this double colored pencil, the blue version with it. So we know all of this is ocean. This here. We don't really know what happens up north and down south, which is fine at this stage. But the way water works with gravity, it floats down. So we can imagine that from some of these areas, like high mountains, plateaus, we would have rivers that find their way around those mountains to the sea, and some of them will reach the sea and will not. So, for example, here on the north, maybe there will be some kind of short rivers that just float from the mountains into the ocean. Maybe some of them kind of first fill in this crack, then find the way out. And I think if it's very mountainous there, the rivers probably would be more kind of jagged and like moving around the mountains, and there would be also waterfalls there and all that stuff. But on the other side, there also could be rivers. Maybe these rivers, they just kind of float into the fields or kind of go underground and then turn into the marshes, which then feed the lakes. There is one significant place in north that we should put some. Our green factor. There's some place. It's called Pearl River Fall. So this is kind of where the part of the green faction is. So that's somewhere here, I guess, could be, because we know that there are like waterfalls and there is a big lake, so maybe there is a lake that formed in this crack, and then some of it just starts floating through, and then it connects and goes down. And then up north here, because those two tectonic plates are kind of moving away from each other, I would imagine the melted snow ice will just kind of create these marshlands here. So maybe we can mark these. So up here in the north there might be some more marshes, and maybe some of them are kind of feeding the lakes. And again, this is kind of just the sketch where we try to layer all of the elements of the world map and important things together. The other thing about rivers is they usually join and rarely separate. There could be, you know, a strong river flow that maybe fills in the valley and then splits into different rivers overflowing on both sides. I guess that's an option. But more often than not, there would be rivers joining together. So maybe here up north we have the river going from, like, one is collecting water from the northern side and then it goes from south, and then they join with a lake that overflows. But where rivers could separate is when they reach the ocean, because usually you have flatter areas there, so less deep less deep river banks, so it's easier for water to overflow and find kind of alternative routes there. So that also something would be on geographical location to explore. Maybe there's also a little island in the delta. Maybe this marsh up north is also feeding another river that just slowly gathers water, floats in these slow curves. Yeah. And wherever the river would make the turn, you can probably safely assume that there would be some sort of hill that the river is turning around, which gives you another point that you can use for your narrative. So maybe there is a castle, a fort, looking for characters. So here we can also maybe just have some lakes that formed in these crevices that never really go anywhere, just kind of seep through the cracks and float down somewhere in the ground. But on the surface it's just this mountainous lake system. Maybe a couple more smaller rivers just finding their way from the mountains to the sea. Very cool pencil with red and blue color on both ends. This very on it. Thank you. I think you might know where it comes. I always liked this idea, you know, I saw it as a kid in some, I guess, like a constructor's engineer kit or something like that, for children who want to be engineers. And I always found it fascinating that some professions use red and blue pencils or like blue paper for blueprints, and we simple people were stuck with graphite and white paper for some reason. But you know, now that I'm older, I can afford a two-colored pencil. It's fun. Alright, so we have more or less covered the rivers, the marshes, we have some lakes here and there, mostly on the south and north. The river here maybe. We'll see if we need more. Now, do we need to go deep into ocean currents? Probably not. But let's cover biomes real fast. We did cover them a little bit more, but there was no reasoning behind it. All these areas where we have cliffs or mountains meeting the ocean, there is always a potential for something fun. You know, you can put a coral reef there or some sort of archipelago of islands or other fun thing. So, you know, without going too deep into climate and biomes and all that, just as a rule of thumb, what I'm trying to keep in mind is like to understand how your world is adapting to the conditions, or in general what kind of conditions there are. You would need to know what kind of relationship the world is in energy source. In this simple case, like our Earth, there is a sun. In the case of Neotara, we have 6 suns and and the black hole. But ultimately, they're all kind of clustered together, so we can, for now, just imagine it's one very weird, complicated sun. Then, you know, imagine how your planet is positioned around that sun. Is like diagonal orbit. Is there a diagonal orbit? That doesn't sound right. Is the orbit tilted? And then you also would need to know the axis of the planet is also tilted, which in our case I think, I'm not sure actually what my other teams had named. Like it doesn't have to be, could be, I don't know. But ultimately this will dictate the amount of light that different parts of the world get during the season. So you have sun hitting that area, this planet rotating. So if the planet would be on the tilted axis, then if it's on this side of the sun, you see that the north, if it's rotating, it will always get more sun south, because this one will never be in the light until the planet goes around the sun. And if it's that side, in the same direction, you will see that the sun is kind of hitting this axis from the other side, so you will have more sun south pole, less north. At least that's how I imagine our universe working. I also realized it was a bit off the screen, but anyhow, you know how our world works, right? So no need to explain. For Eotara, this is obviously more or less the same. So you would have kind of two poles that have changing life conditions, you know, and then you would have the equator, which kind of has more or less the same amount of light all the time. So like, no matter how you tilt that axis until you tilt it to 90 degrees, your equator would be kind of the hottest area. And in our case, we can also kind of have the equator to be maybe right in the middle, or narrative priority of this area. We know that the events of the first set all happen, or kind of the core of the events is kind of right here in the middle, where the emperor is thinking about connecting two oceans with a canal, which can threaten the whole world, because you know this connecting point is very important. For trade, for example, but also from the world building perspective, there is something sleeping underneath the sea. So if this is our kind of equator, we can say maybe like the tip or the pole is, one pole is somewhere here, there is maybe here, and the continent maybe goes all the way to the pole and kind of takes over it. We don't know yet. We haven't explored that far, and maybe there is something like on the North Pole, on the South Pole here. That kind of doesn't matter. What matters is how far these things are from the equator. So let's say this would be the tropical area, and then we would have, what else do we have there after tropical? Double check. Tropical, then we would have temperate, which is maybe like till here. And then the same would be then on the other side. This would be temperate. And then we would have boreal, or I guess tundra. maybe this until the pole, basically. We can have all of that being generally tempered. And this will be burial contrast. I guess burial is not a great word for it because it only means the northern part. Is that true? No one knows. But generally speaking, we can see it as like this tropical area will be the hottest, and that will have its own consequences with the climate getting milder and milder as you get to the pole until it gets extreme again because of the poles, the extremes. So we can just color in the middle here. We'll have the desert, so I guess I will cover it in yellow. This camera is shaking pretty substantially. There could be other areas with the desert, obviously. There are deserts in, like there are also icy deserts, for example. But in our case, this will be kind of the desert on this kind of continent. And this will be kind of the hottest area, so in our case, it will cause a lot of life to die or hide, so, and a lot of plant life wouldn't be able to adapt to these harsh conditions of wind blowing between the oceans and the sun, 6 of them, scorching the planet day and night. Well, not at night. But then from there you would still have some areas where you would have a bit more vegetation because there would be some more water. So all of those areas here in this tropical region where we have water nearby, we can kind of mark green because there will be more life there. As well, and here in the mountains also it would be a little bit cooler, a little bit easier plants to grow. If you followed previous streams, you know that we did talk a little bit about the plants, and that in case of Earth, the plants are green because of chlorophyll, which they use to photosynthesize, to produce energy from the sun, from the light, right? And in our case, the light will be all different color. And even though, let's say, the plants on Eotara also use chlorophyll for production of energy, which will render them green, but because there are other suns, and maybe for some plants they adapted to withstand certain harsh conditions, they could have kind of these very different and maybe fun color combinations and color surfaces. So some of the forests, you know, like it could have chlorophyll, so technically it's green, but then the outer layer of the leaf is completely rainbow colored because it's trying to protect itself from all the other suns. So that could be an adaptive way to preserve our plants. So then, anyhow, this tropical area will have a lot of energy, a lot of heat, a lot of light, which in some cases will be devastating for the nature, but in some other cases the nature will adapt to it, and because of this abundance of energy, maybe to a degree of overwhelm, they would be also abundance of diversity. So we would have lush jungles here on the edges of the desert, or slowly creeping in the islands because they have less desert in them, less space for the sand. All the sand is getting blown away, so they would have maybe more rocky, jungly type of environments there. And then it would slowly kind of turn into your kind of temperate forests. Here we would have marshes, also could be very interesting territory. And then here in the south, the valleys between the mountains, they would be indeed lush and green in different ways, but the mountains themselves, because they're so tall, they probably would be just barren mountains, except the areas around lakes if it's not too high up. Even then, cracks between mountains, there would be life. So this is roughly the kind of idea behind this continent. It's a little bit more about how it's turned out to be rather than what it is. Wait, what did I just say? Yeah, rather than what it is, in the sense that it's not a final map, it's just a sketch. But sketches are very helpful for excuse me. Yeah, as you can hear, this time I don't have the noise cancelling as I did all the previous times. So you might hear a little bit more noise from the pencils, the paper. Let me know in the comments or in the chat if it's annoying. So now, okay, we have our rough biomes planned here, right? What else do we want to cover today? Would it make sense to make a bigger version of this map? and then mark some areas for future streams, so you guys can vote on Discord. Maybe, I don't know if it makes sense, but we can also think about it for just a moment from the point of view of wind directions and that kind of stuff, because that will determine how the rain falls and where is the water transferred. So we can imagine that the water is evaporating in the ocean, because that's where you have water. It rises up and then it floats around depending on the streams of air. And the streams of air, I guess, would depend on the rotation of the planet and what else is happening to it. And then mountain ridges, they would determine, I guess, where the wind can pass through, if it's going along the ridges or across them. But we also know that the hot air rises up and the cold air sinks down. So you would have kind of the hot air being produced at the equator and then slowly moving outwards till it cools down, and then let's pretend this one is not tilted. You would have colder wind areas, poles, and warmer in the middle. So this one goes up, floats around, and then it goes down as it cools down. So with that, you would have a lot of water evaporating from the tropical region where it's all dry because of that, and land somewhere between the pole and some temperate areas, depending on the mountains, the rotation, and all of that stuff. So we can imagine kind of if we look at it from above, you know, maybe the air is kind of moving from this area. We know that it will move this direction, in this direction, and same on this side. So it would kind of maybe blow along the ridge. And then it would kind of fall down in the rain. So maybe there is one stream that goes like up here and then falls down and then kind of goes underneath here. Does this make sense? We need aerologists here as well, meteorologists. Maybe after we're done with this, at some point we can invite physicists to check the planet's realism and invite some meteorologists to check if the weather makes sense. So also if our planet is rotating, the water would be moving around. Maybe there is like a stream that goes around this. Around this continent and swirls around back. And then some of the water would swirl upwards. Maybe carry the heat from the equator and sort of dissipate here. So that would also, those masses of water would also carry the heat. So you can imagine that like this, the air rises here and will kind of blow along the shore, whereas on the south side maybe, well, it could also blow still. But some of it would kind of blow between the mountain ridges and get sort of trapped there. Then on this side, some of the air will just kind of moving upwards and raining down into these marshes, which makes sense. And some of it will be just following the water until it cools down. And on this side, I could imagine the air kind of just following the ridges as well, and dissipating maybe to the right. Does this make sense so far? I guess if you squint, it does. I wouldn't, wouldn't use this to create a real planet. But luckily I don't have means for that. So. Alright, so we have covered the continent, the mountains, the rivers, lakes, all that stuff. Let's maybe talk a little bit, just a tiny bit about different cultures. So this is kind of like because we're preparing a map has a purpose, and it's usually a purpose of communicating something. In my case, I want to communicate the world to the players and to the artists who will be hopefully using the map to make their art consistent across different cards. So what's missing here is the narrative piece, right? And in our case, the narrative piece revolves around different cultures and different civilizations that are present in the set number 1. For that, it would be obviously there is some magic involved and all that, and divine intervention and gods and all these good fantasy things, but it also helps to understand how cultures settle around. So when we actually write stories about those heroes or societies, or try to play a game in the world, we would then have a believable structure, because things are rarely random. For example, the civilizations and different sentient creatures, beings, they all need more or less the same thing. They all need energy source and protection. And for our civilizations, usually, cities form on in the places where you have those things. So you need some resources, you need some energy, and you need to have access to your key, resource. Yeah. In the case of most of the creatures on this planet, water, it's all carbon-based. It's a lot, except some creatures who are shape-shifting into energy, but we will cover them another time. For now, let's just assume it's humanoids and animal similar to our animals, just looking. They would all need water, as they're mostly made of water. So everywhere where we have water, we would have a likely chance of having civilizations or people living there. But at the same time, there are areas where it's just too difficult to adapt to the conditions. So, for example, from the story perspective, we know there is a conflict right in the center of the map. That's why we placed it in the center. This is where the capital of the human empire is, and there is a reason why it would be placed here, because it's kind of right in between two oceans, and it's on the connecting line between northern and southern parts of the continent. So everything that migrates back and forth, if it doesn't fly, it has to kind of go through that area. That would be initially probably a good place to camp, and because it's right in between the two oceans, I guess compared to the rest of the desert around it, it would be a little bit milder, and we have some kind of a few hills there to protect. And as the civilization grew, the people who were living there, they also established trading connections to other nations and other villages around. So the location right between land and ocean being connected together would make a lot of sense. So, rivers, fresh water is a great place for, let's, maybe mark them as red, because it's like points of interest. So the central would be there, then, rivers and different other freshwater areas, so lakes estuary of the river is a good place because you have both access to kind of freshwater produce and ocean. And ocean is also a good way of trading, right? So that's why along the coast you would often have some like trading villages or fishing villages that also trade. So let's just put some of the dots here and there to indicate that there might be places of interest where people would gather and live. We also know that on the north side, from our stories, there is the heart of Everforest, so maybe this one will be the capital of the Green faction. This one is the capital of the Yellow faction. We also know that some of the species in that world are adapted to live under the surface of the water. So we would have maybe on the west side, you would have like a capital for the waterfolk, and then obviously all these islands, unless it's just a pile of rocks, especially the islands near the equator, they kind of have the highest chance of also having plants, which means also having fruits or vegetables or other food sources. So it's not just we also know that on the south of this continent we have our Orange faction capital somewhere in the mountains. And somewhere in the mountains would probably also involve having a water source nearby, even though there are flying creatures, flying engineers, you might even say. Let's place it somewhere here. They're kind of secluded, so yes, far south works well for them. And then maybe another trading post, some this river, some island, and then yeah, maybe some scattered places. I don't know. There would be some more mysterious places in the marshlands in the north. So that can place a dot there, some post the island. It would be kind of harder to live in the south because of all the rocks, mountain cliffs. So there would be naturally less villages and big cities south. But the north would be a little bit more flat, so we would have a bit more forest there and a little bit easier conditions for people to live in. So those, I think, are the major interest points. You have, some of the capitals. Let me maybe just make capitals big. So we have orange capital here, we have blue capital here, yellow, and I guess purple capital here, because the purple faction, they're super shady guys. They live in catacombs and underground structures. And then you have the green capital here, and the red capital is on the So those are our 5 major cities. We can dive into next few streams. I think for today this is gonna be the end of the sketching part. I wanted to go through the logic of how and where to place certain elements on the map. I think that we covered today. Hope it was okay. But now I will switch to the music part and play some improvised sounds. Just give me a minute. So, for those of you who are new to this is Roland MC101 Proofbox. A little bit dusty but rusty. But what is gonna happen is I'm just gonna play some music for you. There's gonna be an improvised session as always. A bit of a, I guess, shorter part of the stream today, but I feel like I talked, so hopefully we covered the basics, and for the next stream I will put a poll on Discord or and Instagram, so you guys can vote if you want to pick a specific capital to explore next time. Also, before we go into this musical nonsense part, I wanted to remind you all that we do have a Discord server with growing community of people posting their things, also sharing their art, asking questions. It's quiet, it's cozy and small, so join in. It will be fun, and it's also the best way to stay up to date if there are any changes in my schedule or any polls you can vote on. That's about Discord, and then if you haven't subscribed yet on YouTube, or if you're watching Twitch and you haven't followed yet, What are you waiting for? And with that, I will, as always, start with what we did last time and then move it somewhat else. And I hope to see you all on the other side of this. Well. Looks like we have survived another one of those improvisational thingies. With that, I want to thank you all for being with me here today. I hope you had a good time, and I wish you a nice Sunday ahead, and I will see you. Thank you. Bye bye.